My son stepped out of a liquor store in Nashville 3 years after I buried him. He had a beard, different hair, a baseball cap pulled low, but I knew the way he carried his left shoulder. I knew the pause in his stride. I knew the hand that reached for the door. I stood across the street in the cold and watched my dead son check his phone. Then he looked right past me. He didn't flinch. He didn't freeze. He didn't even blink. That was the moment I understood my grief had been useful to somebody. If you've ever watched your own blood walk around inside a lie, then you know what silence feels like. I didn't call out to him. I didn't run after him. I just stood there while every excuse I had made for my family burned off at once. 3 years earlier, I was a 55-year-old widower in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, living on retirement checks and whatever strength was left in my hands. I had worked as an electrician most of my life. Long days, cold ladders, basements, service calls. Panels older than I was. By then my right hand was half ruined. Too many years twisting wire, gripping conduit, and pretending pain was just part of the trade. After my wife died, the house got too quiet. Her coffee mug stayed in the cabinet. Her coat stayed by the door for months. I kept telling myself I still had Kevin. My son lived in Nashville with his wife, Carol, and their little boy, Tyler. That mattered to me. It mattered more than I said out loud. Then one wet morning in November, my phone rang before sunrise. A Tennessee number. A calm voice. A car accident on a rain-slick road. By the time the word settled, Kevin was already gone. I flew down there in a fog. At the funeral, Carol cried hard enough to shake. Tyler looked confused, not broken. Too young to understand death, maybe. That was what I told myself then. I stood over my son's coffin and felt the last solid piece of my family go with him. Carol leaned into people. People held her. People told her she was strong. I remember one moment outside the funeral home. Rain on the railing. My coat still damp. She said, "I don't know how I'm supposed to do this alone." I believed her. That was the first mistake. A few days later, she told me rent was coming due. Bills were stacking. Tyler needed stability. She didn't ask in a greedy way. That is what made it easy. She spoke softly, like someone ashamed to need help. I told her I'd send money. There are decisions a man makes before the sentence is even finished in his head. That was one of them. I started sending her $1,200 every month. I didn't have $1,200 to spare. Not really. So I cut everything down. Cheaper food. Less heat. No extras. No reason to spend on myself anyway. Then I went back to work when I could find it. Not full-time. Just enough jobs to keep the money moving south. Some mornings my right hand locked halfway closed before I even got out of bed. I would stand at the sink and run hot water over it. Open, close, open, close. Then I would go wire somebody's garage or replace a breaker and tell myself this was what fathers did. Then what grandfathers did. Carol sent pictures of Tyler. Birthday cake, school shirt, a missing tooth, a plastic dinosaur in his hand. She let him call me. Sometimes he sounded sleepy, sometimes distracted, sometimes happy enough that I could breathe again. That was part of the design. I know that now. Back then it looked like effort. It looked like a family trying to survive a loss. Once in a while something felt off. A date that didn't line up. A story that ended too fast. A request that came right after silence. But every time that feeling rose, I buried it. People have a phrase for everything. It's family. They say it like that settles the math. And if you question the numbers, suddenly you're the cold one. You're the suspicious one. You're the man who can't let grief sit still. I knew exactly what people would say. You should let it go. You're overreacting. She's doing her best. So I kept paying. Month after month. Year after year. The first year hurt. The second year changed me. The third year made me numb enough to call it routine. Then my neighbor Roy came back from a trip to Nashville. He stopped me outside my place and said, "Frank, this is going to sound crazy." I almost told him not to finish. He said he had seen a man walking out of a store who looked so much like Kevin it turned his stomach. Not similar. Not maybe. Kevin. I stared at him. Roy kept talking, but I barely heard the rest. Something about beard. Different clothes. A different name somebody used near him. I told Roy he was mistaken. I said it too quickly. That night I slept maybe an hour. I got up twice and checked old photos like they could prove a dead man stayed dead. By morning, I had decided Roy was wrong. I drove to Nashville to prove it. That is the truth. I went down there to protect the version of my son I still had left. And I almost succeeded. Until the second day. Until that door opened. Until my dead son walked out into daylight like the burial had happened to somebody else. That wasn't the worst part. If you think the shock is the whole story, it isn't. I did what I had trained myself to do on job sites when something dangerous showed up without warning. I stayed still first. When a panel hums wrong, you do not grab it. You listen. You watch. You figure out what is hot before you touch anything. So I watched Kevin. He came out with a paper bag and checked the street both ways. Not panicked. Not rushed. Comfortable. That comfort told me more than his face did. A man hiding for 3 years and still walking that loose wasn't improvising. He had been living inside the lie long enough to trust it. I turned away before he could really see me. My legs felt weak, but my head got clear. Clear in a hard way. Like cold metal. I followed at a distance. He got into a dark sedan. Not new. Not cheap either. He drove off and I didn't chase him close. I had done enough service work to know distance matters. Too near and people sense you. Too far and you lose the line. I stayed somewhere in the middle. He pulled into a small apartment complex on the far side of town. I kept driving. Didn't stop. Didn't stare. That was deception number 1. I acted like a man who had no reason to remember the place. Then I circled back 20 minutes later from the other side. Kevin's car was there. No one spoke. Not yet. I parked 2 buildings over and sat with both hands on the wheel. I had pictured this meeting in anger before. If Roy had been right, I figured I would drag Kevin out by his collar. Ask one question. Then another, then maybe 10 more. None of that happened. What I felt first was shame. Not because of him. Because of me. 3 years of checks. 3 years of grief. 3 years of defending them in my own head. You can forgive somebody for taking money. Men do that every day. What I couldn't forgive even then was how carefully they had used sorrow. I needed proof before I moved, so I waited until evening and called Carol. I sat in that rental car across from the apartment where my dead son lived and listened to my daughter-in-law answer on the 3rd ring. Her voice came small and tired. She had perfected that sound. "Frank? Just checking in," I said. That was test number 1. She said Tyler was already asleep. Said it had been a long day. Said she was trying to stretch groceries until Friday. While she spoke, Kevin walked past a lit window inside that apartment. I watched his shadow cross the blind. I said, "You sound worn out." She gave a little laugh. The same laugh she used when she wanted pity without asking for it directly. "It's just been hard," she said. I let a few seconds pass. Not too many. Then I said, "I'm thinking about coming down for a visit." Silence. Not long. Just long enough. Then she said, "This week wouldn't be great." That was test number 2. I asked why. She said Tyler had a cold. Then said she had picked up extra shifts. Then changed it again and said the apartment was a mess. Too many answers. Fast answers. I have spent enough years finding bad wiring inside finished walls to know when somebody is covering one problem with 3 bad patches. I told her not to worry. Said maybe next month. She relaxed right there on the phone. I heard it. Then she thanked me for always being there. I almost laughed. After we hung up, I sat in the dark another hour. One light turned off. Then another. Near midnight, Kevin stepped outside again to smoke. He leaned on the rail and stared at his phone. No grief. No fear. No sign that he remembered the old man in Pittsburgh working through hand pain to keep his son's widow afloat. I went back to my motel and didn't sleep. In the morning, I called a private investigator. I did not know him. Roy knew a man who knew him. That was enough. When we met, I kept it simple. "My son supposedly died 3 years ago," I said. "I saw him alive yesterday." The investigator did not look shocked. That bothered me more than it should have. He asked for names, dates, money, insurance, anything unusual. I gave him everything I had. The funeral date, Carol's address, copies of transfers, photos she had sent, every detail I could remember. He asked whether I wanted Kevin confronted. "No," I said. "Not yet." That was deception number 2. As far as Kevin and Carol would know, I was still the useful old man in Pennsylvania. The investigator told me to go home and act normal. Let him pull threads. I hated that advice because it was right. So I went back to Pittsburgh and slipped into my old life like nothing had happened. That took more strength than anger would have. I called Carol on schedule, sent the money on schedule, asked for Tyler on schedule. That was deception number 3. And all the while I listened. I started doing small reaction tests. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to see where the lie bent. 1 week I sent the money a day late. Carol called before noon. She tried to sound embarrassed. "Just making sure you're okay." But she never asked how I was until after she asked whether the transfer had gone through. That was test number 3. Next month I told her a contractor in Pittsburgh had offered me steady work and I might need to tighten up for a while. She went quiet. Then said, "Well, Tyler really depends on this. Not me. Not us. Not family. This." That was test number 4. I said I understood and sent the full amount anyway. I wanted them relaxed. The investigator began calling every few days. Kevin had been using another name. Kevin had not died. Kevin had debts. A lot of them. Old debt. Fresh debt. The kind that piles because a man believes another lie will buy him time. That was the first real crack. A fake death made no sense for freedom. It made sense for escape. Then another crack opened. Carol was not some abandoned widow holding together the wreckage. She was in it from the start. Phone records. Movements. Paper trails. Things lined up too neatly for innocence. I remember sitting at my kitchen table with the investigator on speaker. My wife's old placemat was still in the drawer. I had not thrown it out. The investigator said, "Frank, I need you prepared for this to be organized." Organized. That word landed harder than fraud. Because random betrayal is ugly. Planned betrayal is colder. I asked him one question. Did Kevin know where the money was coming from? He said yes. No hesitation. Then he said something else. Something I still hear. "He knew about your hand too." I didn't speak. The investigator said Kevin had joked that I would keep sending money as long as Carol kept asking. I stared at the wall over my sink for so long the room blurred. No one spoke. That was when grief changed shape. Up to that point, part of me had still been reaching for some smaller explanation. Maybe panic. Maybe Kevin had gotten trapped and Carol had followed him. Maybe shame had grown too large to back out of. Men tell themselves these things because the full truth is harder to hold. Then the investigator showed me there was structure to it. Kevin's fake death was not one desperate decision made in a storm. It was a plan with stages. There had been the accident story, then the funeral, then the insurance, then the widow benefits, then my money, steady and predictable every month. They had built a clean circuit and drawn current from every source they could reach. That is electrician thinking. You trace the line. You stop guessing. You see what feeds what. And once I traced it, I stopped asking whether they meant harm. Harm was the design. The investigator met me again in person. We sat in a diner booth near the highway. Coffee neither of us finished. He slid copies across the table. Insurance proceeds had been collected. Benefits had been taken under the story of Kevin's death. Cash withdrawals matched periods when Carol claimed she was behind on rent. I looked at numbers for a long time. Money tells the truth in a way people rarely do. It leaves patterns, timing, pressure points. Carol had told me she was barely surviving. But survival doesn't usually come with savings set aside for disappearing. That was what the investigator was seeing. A fund, little by little. Not for Tyler. Not for groceries. Not for keeping a roof overhead. For leaving. I asked where Kevin had been staying all that time. The investigator said he had moved around early on, then settled near Nashville under the new name. That mattered too. If he had wanted to see his son, he could have. If he had wanted to work honestly, he could have. He chose the lie because the lie paid better. And that still was not the worst part. I asked about Tyler. The investigator looked down before answering. Just once. But I noticed. He hasn't been with them consistently, he said. What does that mean? It means Tyler has been staying with Carol's sister in Knoxville for long stretches. How long? Almost 2 years. I remember the sound in that diner then. Fork on plate. Ice in a glass. A truck outside backing up. It all kept going. I asked him to say it again because my brain refused the first version. He did. Kevin and Carol were alive, together in the scheme, stacking money to run. And Tyler, the child used in every phone call and every request, had been left with Carol's sister for most of 2 years. His parents were not dead. They were absent by choice. That was when the story stopped being only about me. You can make an old man look foolish. He will live. You abandon your kid while using his name to milk money from family, and that reaches a different place. I went home and stared at the framed photo of Kevin holding Tyler as a baby. Kevin looked proud in that picture. Maybe he even meant it then. I don't know. I had spent years protecting that image in my head. Father, provider, man under pressure. But the man in the picture and the man in Nashville were no longer connected. Maybe they had not been for a long time. I still didn't confront them. That part matters. A lot of people think anger is action. Sometimes anger ruins the only chance to stop what's happening. So I stayed quiet and kept testing. I told Carol I was thinking about coming down for Tyler's birthday. That was test number 5. She said Carol's sister had arranged something local for him and travel would confuse the child. She said routine mattered. Routine. That word told on her. Not because it was cruel, because it was practiced. I asked, "So he's with your sister again?" Small pause. Then she said, "Just for a little while. To help." Help with what? I almost asked. With having living parents who couldn't be bothered? Instead I said, "I see." She filled the silence fast. Too fast. Talked about school. Talked about growth spurts. Talked about how children needed stability after trauma. Trauma she and Kevin had manufactured. I wrote everything down after the call. Not feelings. Facts. Time. Phrase. Hesitation. Change in tone. Years in electrical work teach you to respect tiny signs. A warm outlet. A faint smell. A breaker that trips only under load. Ignore small things and fire comes later. That was how I treated every call now. The investigator dug further. Kevin had been seen with another woman. That detail sat ugly with me, but it was secondary. I was not chasing infidelity. I was tracing conspiracy. Still, it explained something. This was no secret mourning household. No private burden carried by two desperate parents. They had already moved into the next life while still billing me for the old one. I called Tyler a few days later. He answered after Carol put him on. "Hi, Grandpa." His voice was thinner than I expected. "Careful too." I asked what he had been doing. He said he had been playing outside. I asked where. He named Knoxville. Carol cut in quick and said he had just been visiting. That interruption bothered me because Tyler had answered naturally. No pause. No confusion. Children often tell truth before adults frame it. I changed direction and asked if he missed his mom. He said, "She comes sometimes." Sometimes. Not every day. Not always. Sometimes. I kept my own voice steady. "Do you like staying there?" He said, "Auntie says it's only until they're ready." Ready for what? He was about to say more. I heard Carol take the phone back. "He's tired," she said. I let her go. I didn't push. That was strategic too. Push too hard and liars tighten. Leave space and they keep talking later. That night I sat in my living room with the lamp off. I thought about all the times Carol had used Tyler's name. Tyler needs shoes. Tyler's school needs this. Tyler had a fever. Tyler needs something normal. Each request had landed because of the same child they were not even raising. That is a kind of theft people do not talk about enough. Not money, meaning. They had stolen the meaning of family and used it like a tool. The next time Carol called for money, I tested again. I said, "I've been considering sending part of it straight toward Tyler's school." That was test number 6. She said almost instantly, "Cash is easier right now. Not better. Not safer. Easier." Then she added, "Please trust me." That line nearly broke me. Because trust was the one thing she had already spent. I told her I would handle it the usual way, and I did. The trap wasn't ready yet. At the end of that week, the investigator told me Kevin and Carol were preparing to leave the country. Costa Rica. I wrote the word down and stared at it. That was the twist behind the twist. They had not only faked death and lived off fraud, they had used the time to build an exit, and Tyler was not part of that plan. That part settled everything inside me. Once I knew they were saving to run, every past conversation changed shape. Old words came back with new weight. "I'm doing my best. We're trying to stay afloat. Tyler needs time. Please don't make this harder." Every line had sounded strained before. Now each one sounded measured. Not dramatic. Measured. That is what made them effective. People expect lies to be loud. Most dangerous ones are calm. The investigator laid out what he had. Kevin's debts were heavy enough to explain the fake death. That answered motive 1. Insurance proceeds and widow benefits answered motive 2. Money from me answered motive 3. Costa Rica answered motive 4. By then, I was no longer trying to understand Kevin as my son. I was looking at him as a man running a scheme. Distance helps with that. It has to. If I kept saying my boy, I would lose focus. So I started using his name in my head. Kevin did this. Kevin said that. Kevin knew. It sounds small. It wasn't. I drove to Tennessee again, this time with a folder in the passenger seat and no hope left to protect. The investigator wanted more confirmation before federal agents got involved. Not because the case was weak, because timing matters. A bad arrest misses people. A rushed accusation spooks them. Then they vanish. So I watched again. That week I saw Kevin enter the apartment under the false name. I saw Carol there too. No widow's apartment. No lonely mother barely surviving. They moved around each other like people used to, sharing space and secrets. One afternoon I stayed parked long enough to see them loading bags into the trunk. Not full luggage. Just trial runs maybe. Sorting. Preparing. I took note of dates and times and passed them on. Then I did something that still makes people ask whether I went too far. I called Carol and told her I was thinking about moving closer to Nashville. That was test number 7. I said Pittsburgh had become lonely. I said maybe Tyler needed me nearby. I said I could look for a small place and help more directly. Silence. Longer this time. Then Carol said, "That's a big change, Frank." I said I had been thinking about family. She answered too carefully, maybe too gently, said I should not make decisions out of grief, said Tennessee was expensive, said Tyler's routines were already fragile. Not one word about wanting me near my grandson. That told me everything. If I were still only a paycheck, distance helped them. Presence threatened them. I pushed once more. Very light. I could even take Tyler some weekends. Her voice hardened before she softened it again. I don't think that would be good right now. There it was. Control slipping for 1 second. No one spoke after that. Not for a few beats. Then she asked whether I had already looked at places. Panic dressed as conversation. I said no, just thinking out loud. She was sweet again after that. Too sweet. She asked about my health, my hand, the weather. When liars sense movement, they start dusting the furniture no one mentioned. I got off the phone and sat in the motel chair staring at the wall unit air conditioner. Part of me wondered whether I was becoming the thing they would later describe. Suspicious old man. Obsessive father. Man who couldn't accept death, then couldn't accept the truth. That question matters because viewers of a story like this always split. Some will say the signs were obvious. Some will say I should have let federal people handle it from a distance. Maybe. But family betrayal has a way of making your own judgment feel contaminated. You start double-checking your own pulse. That is why I kept using tests instead of accusations. Reactions are cleaner than speeches. I called Tyler again the next day. Carol put him on speaker, which I did not like. I asked whether he had seen his dad recently. That was test number 8. Tyler said nothing. I heard Carol breathe in. Then Tyler said, "Mom said not to talk about that." The room inside me went cold. Carol cut in fast. "He's confused, Frank." I said, "About what?" She said, "About memories." Memories. I had spent years pulling exact faults from loose clues. That answer was not just weak. It was reckless. Because innocent people correct children. They don't bury them in fog. I apologized. Acted embarrassed. That was deception number 4. Then I ended the call. The investigator told me to stop direct testing for a few days. They were getting jumpier. He didn't want them spooked. So I did what men my age do when they can't punch a wall and can't sleep either. I cleaned. Garage first. Then drawers. Then the closet with my wife's winter things still hanging untouched. I found Kevin's old baseball glove in a plastic bin. Leather dry. Laces stiff. I sat on the floor holding it and tried to pinpoint when I had lost him. Not the fake death. Before that. Maybe when he first learned that charm worked faster than effort. Maybe when I covered for him too many times because his mother wanted peace. Maybe when debt became his normal weather and every rescue taught him rescue would continue. I don't know. What I do know is that by then he had learned the family phrase as well as anybody. It's family. That sentence hides a lot of theft. The investigator called late that night. He had stronger documentation now. Travel planning, cash movement, coordination. Enough to take the next step. He said we needed to be careful because Kevin was not alone in the exit plan. The woman I had heard about was tied in somehow. He did not oversell it. He just said she was present and moving with them. I asked whether Tyler's situation was fully documented. He said yes. Records and observations both pointed the same direction. "Frank," he said, "once we move this to the FBI, this stops being a private family matter." "It stopped being that a long time ago," I said. And I meant it. Still, when I hung up, I sat very still. Crossing that line was different from knowing the truth. Knowing is private. Acting makes it real. I thought about Kevin in handcuffs. Thought about Tyler finding out later. Thought about Carol saying I destroyed what little they had left. For 1 minute, maybe 2, I almost backed off. Then I remembered Tyler saying, "Mom said not to talk about that." A child carrying adult lies is one of the ugliest sounds in the world. By morning, my mind was made up. I took every document I had and made 3 copies. One for me, one for the investigator, one for the federal agents. I laid them out on my kitchen table in order. Funeral, transfers, call records, insurance, benefits, sightings, travel planning, notes from calls about Tyler. Looking at it all at once did something useful. It removed drama. People hear words like fake death and assume chaos. This was not chaos. This was administration. Forms filled, money moved, stories repeated, a child placed out of sight, an old man milked on schedule. That made it worse. When I met with the FBI, I expected skepticism. Instead, I got attention. Not sympathy, not comfort, attention. I appreciated that. I told them exactly what I knew and exactly what I had inferred. There is a difference, and I kept it clean. I had seen Kevin alive. The investigator had traced the false identity and the debt. The financial pattern showed fraud. The child had been left in Knoxville. The couple appeared to be preparing to flee to Costa Rica. I did not embellish. I didn't need to. One agent asked why I had continued sending money after my suspicions began. I said, because cutting it early might have shut the door before we knew where it opened. He looked at me for a second, then nodded. That was the electrician in me again. Sometimes you leave the line energized long enough to find the fault. Part 6. The plan became simple on paper and hard in the chest. I would keep acting normal. The investigator would keep watching. The agents would move when Kevin, Carol, and anyone tied to the flight plan committed to leaving. Until then, I was to say nothing. That should have been easy. It wasn't. Carol called 2 nights later asking whether I could send an extra $400. She said rent had gone up unexpectedly. I almost asked which rent, the widow apartment or the one she shared with my dead son. Instead, I let her talk. That was test number 9, though she didn't know it. I said I might be able to help if I knew exactly what it was for. She stumbled. First rent, then utilities, then Tyler's needs. Always Tyler at the end, like a signature. I said, can I talk to him? She said he was asleep. It was not even 9. I said, he used to stay up later. She answered, things have changed. Yes, they had. I sent the extra money. I want that understood. I sent it. Some people will say that was weakness. Maybe. Or maybe I knew bait had a cost. The call after that was from Kevin, not directly as himself, under the other name. The investigator had warned me that could happen. A casual contact. A test from their side. He called about electrical work in Pittsburgh. Said he had gotten my number through somebody. His voice was lower. Rougher. But it was Kevin. I recognized him by the rhythm before the words. That was the first time in 3 years my son spoke to me while pretending to be someone else. I played along. That was deception number 5. We discussed a fake service issue for maybe 2 minutes. Then he asked whether business was steady. Testing me. I said enough to get by. Said retirement money covered the rest. He said, that's good. I wondered whether he was smiling. Then he asked, light as air, whether I still had family down south. I looked out my kitchen window and said, just my grandson. A beat passed. Then he said, that's something. I wrote every word down after he hung up. No one spoke in the house but me. Still, I read the notes twice. That call did one thing I needed. It proved Kevin was active in monitoring me. Not absent. Not detached. Active. He knew I remained a source to manage. The investigator said the departure timeline was narrowing. More cash was being gathered. More movement. More coordination with the woman traveling with Kevin. I didn't ask much about her. She wasn't the center. Kevin and Carol were. The agents needed patience. I needed control. So I built myself a routine. Wake, stretch the hand, coffee, write what I remembered, wait for updates, answer family calls like an obedient machine. In the middle of all this, I drove to Knoxville. I had not planned to. I just woke up and did it. I did not go there to take Tyler. I did not go there to make a scene. I went there because I needed to see with my own eyes that he existed outside the lies. I stayed back, watched from across the street. He came out with a backpack too big for him and walked beside Carol's sister to a car. He looked clean, fed, quiet. That eased one fear and sharpened another. He was being kept, yes, but he was also being parked. There is a difference. I did not approach him. That is one of the hardest things I have ever done, because walking up would have satisfied me and endangered everything else. So I watched my grandson get driven away by the woman who had done more parenting than either of his actual parents lately, and I stayed hidden. On the drive back, I argued with myself for 200 miles. Was I already too deep in revenge? Was I telling myself this was about justice because admitting pain felt weak? Had Kevin become a criminal, or had he become a coward I was now helping destroy? Those questions came and went. Then I remembered the funeral, Carol shaking, Tyler confused, my own hand throbbing while I wired strangers' houses to fund their escape. Whatever tenderness remained did not survive that. At the end of that week, the agents confirmed they were ready. They believed Kevin and Carol were close to making the move, possibly days. The investigator told me to prepare for the final stretch. "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Normal," he said. That word again. So I called Carol and told her the next monthly payment had been sent. She thanked me and said, "I don't know what we'd do without you." I said, "I know." She laughed softly, like I had made a dry joke. I hadn't. The last days before the airport felt slower than the 3 years before them. When men know impact is coming, time behaves strangely. Every phone call sounds loaded. Every silence feels like a wire under tension. I stayed in Tennessee for the final stretch. Motel room. Same chair. Same humming air unit. A Bible in the drawer I never opened. The investigator updated me in clipped sentences. Kevin active. Carol active. Bags moved. Cash confirmed. The agents wanted no disruptions. So I waited and did what waiting men do. I replayed everything from the beginning and noticed details I had once dismissed. The funeral had been closed casket. At the time, that had seemed merciful. Rain crash. Bad accident. Let the family remember him whole. Now it sat differently. I had not seen Kevin one last time because there had been nothing to see. That detail returned like a nail rising through old wood. Memory callbacks are cruel that way. A thing that once looked like compassion can come back wearing another face. I remembered Carol gripping my forearm after the service, saying he wouldn't want Tyler to struggle. Back then it sounded like grief finding language. Now it sounded like positioning. I remembered her first request for help, how careful it was, how ashamed she appeared. That shame had probably been rehearsal. No one spoke in my motel room when those memories came back. Not even the television. I left it off. I kept a legal pad on the bed and wrote down what changed in my understanding. Not for therapy, for steadiness. Electric work teaches sequence. You don't fix a problem by staring at sparks. You isolate steps. Step 1, Kevin alive. Step 2, Carol involved. Step 3, fraud established. Step 4, Tyler neglected. Step 5, flight imminent. Seeing it laid out kept me from drifting into emotion and ruining the end. I still had to perform normal one more time. Carol called the night before they were set to move. Her voice was bright in a forced way. Too light. The way people talk when they are already halfway out the door in their head. She said Tyler had been asking about me. That was test number 10, though I didn't plan it. I said, "Put him on." Silence. Then she said he was with her sister. I answered, "Again?" She said, "Just temporarily." I let that sit there. Then I said, "Carol, I've been thinking maybe I should put Tyler in my will properly." She stopped breathing for a second. I heard it. That was test number 11. She recovered fast. Said that was generous. Said Kevin would have wanted that. Kevin, not my son. Not the dead man. The living conspirator she had just forgotten to keep buried. She corrected herself so quickly most people would miss it. "I mean, he would have," she said. Would have. I stared at the motel wallpaper and said, "Maybe we should all sit down and talk about Tyler soon." Her answer came flat. "Maybe after things settle." Settle where? In Costa Rica? I said fine and ended the call. Then I called the investigator and gave him the exact wording. He did not react much on the phone. Professionals save reaction for the file, but he heard what I heard. The next morning I went to the airport parking lot hours early. I was not part of the arrest team. I knew that. I stayed where I was told. From a distance, airports look almost peaceful. Carts, glass, people dragging ordinary worries behind them. I sat in my car and watched families hug like departures were normal pain. Then I thought about Tyler, a child left in Knoxville while his parents, one legally dead, prepared to leave the country with cash and false peace. This was the motive reveal stripped bare. Debt started it. Greed carried it. Self-interest finished it. Not survival. Not family. Not desperation alone. Choice. The agents had their positions. The investigator texted once. "They're moving." I watched the terminal doors and felt none of what I expected. No rage. No trembling. Just a kind of hard stillness. Kevin appeared first. Hat low. Beard trimmed. Rolling luggage. Carol came beside him. Calm. Focused. No widow in her. No struggling mother. And with them was the woman tied to Kevin's new life. 3 people walking toward an exit plan built on a funeral. No one spoke near me. I thought I would feel the urge to run forward. Instead, I watched. That mattered, because the trap had to close around their own choices, not my scene. The agents moved in near the check-in area. Not dramatic. Efficient. One approached Kevin from the side. Another blocked the path. Carol's face changed before Kevin's did. That was revealing. Kevin tried confusion first, then offense, then distance. Carol went straight to fear. Bags were opened. Cash came out. Documents came out. Passports came out. The woman with them started talking fast. Too fast. Kevin kept repeating versions of the same lie. Mistake. Mix-up. Identity issue. But a lie that survives in private does not survive fluorescent light and paperwork. I stayed back and watched my son's shoulders finally lose that easy looseness I had seen outside the liquor store. That was the first honest posture I had seen from him in years. I got one look at his face when he turned. Recognition. Not sorrow. Not shame. Recognition. He knew then who had refused to stay buried with the story. And still, even then, I did not walk over. The agents didn't need my anger. They already had evidence. That is the thing about a trap built right. By the time it closes, you don't need to shout. After the airport stop, things moved fast in ways I had no control over. Interviews, charges, paper, timestamps, statements. The investigator kept me updated only where needed. The agents were even more careful. I understood that. I did not need theater. I needed outcomes. Kevin and Carol had both been caught before leaving the United States. The woman with Kevin went down with the rest of it. Others who helped them were also pulled in. That was the structural collapse, the whole rotten frame giving way at once. Then came the part people assume feels good. It didn't. Satisfaction is the wrong word for watching your own son become a defendant. I sat in my Pittsburgh kitchen with the refrigerator humming and felt tired in my bones. Not triumphant. Tired. Because the arrest did not restore the funeral years. It did not give my wife back. It did not return the money. It did not undo Tyler's confusion. Justice often arrives without comfort. Some people in my position would have started talking then. Calling relatives. Telling neighbors. Making sure everyone knew the truth. I did not. Silence had carried me this far. I stayed with it. But the silence inside me shifted. It was no longer fear of being called unreasonable. It was control. There is a difference between being quiet because you are unsure and being quiet because you no longer need approval. Kevin tried to get messages to me. Indirect ones. Not apologies. Explanations. That detail matters. An apology speaks to harm. An explanation tries to manage consequences. He wanted me to understand debt, pressure, bad decisions, how one thing led to another. I had already understood those. That was never the problem. Plenty of men drown in debt without staging their own death and draining their father. Plenty of parents fail without shelving their child for nearly 2 years. So I did not answer. Carol's side tried something different. Emotion. I heard she had said she never meant for it to go this far, that she panicked, that she had been trying to keep things together. That phrase again. Keep things together. For whom? Not for Tyler. Not for me. Maybe for the version of herself that still wanted to believe she had not chosen this fully. This is where people divide. Some say Kevin must have let it. Some say Carol must have been trapped. Some say desperate people do desperate things. Maybe they do. But desperation doesn't usually require months of steady lying delivered in a practiced voice. It doesn't usually place a child elsewhere while parents build an escape fund. It doesn't laugh about an old man's bad hand. Those things require room inside a person. I went to Knoxville after the arrests. Not with sirens. Not with declarations. Just me driving south with a bag in the back seat and an ache behind my eyes. When I saw Tyler, he looked at me the way children look at adults after a long storm. Careful first, hopeful second. He was older than the last time I had held him. Of course he was. 3 years had happened whether I liked it or not. Carol's sister did not fight me. There was too much truth in the air by then. She knew what had happened. Maybe not all of it, but enough. I won't pretend that moment was clean. A child does not move through betrayal without confusion. Tyler asked where his mom was, then where his dad was, then why everyone kept saying different things. I did not dump adult poison into his lap. I said, "You're coming with me for now." He looked down at his shoes. No one spoke. Then he nodded. On the drive to Pittsburgh, he slept for part of it. Woke up hungry. Slept again. Children return to ordinary needs faster than adults do. That saved me. At a gas stop, he asked whether my house still had the swing in the yard. It did. Old. But there, I said yes. That little question broke something in me more than the airport had, because it reminded me how little a child asks for, and how completely two adults had failed to provide even that honestly. When we got home, I showed him the room I had made ready as best I could. Not fancy, just clean, steady. I told him where the bathroom was, where the cereal was, where the extra blankets were. He walked around touching things lightly. Lamp, dresser, window frame. Then he asked, "Are you leaving too?" I said no. He studied my face like he was checking whether adults could be trusted for that exact sentence. Then he went quiet. That was the breaking point for me. Not public, not loud. Just a child asking the one question no child should need to ask. I stepped into the hallway and put my hand against the wall until the feeling passed. My wife used to say houses remember everything said inside them. I don't know about that, but that old house heard the truth that night. I was not trying to save my son anymore. I had lost him long before the fake death, maybe long before the call from Tennessee, maybe long before his mother died. What remained was Tyler. And once you reduce a thing to what remains, decisions get easier. The legal process kept moving. Kevin would later receive 9 years. Carol would receive 6. The others tied to the scheme were pulled down with them. Those are facts. But when people hear sentences, they imagine closure. Closure is not a sentence. It is routine rebuilt slowly by people who stay. So I got up the next morning and made Tyler breakfast. That was the beginning of the clean ending, even if I didn't know it then. Once Tyler was with me in Pittsburgh, the hardest work changed shape. The big reveal was over. The trap had sprung. The lies were public enough to carry consequences. Now everything depended on ordinary repetition. Wake him up, feed him, get him settled, answer his questions without making him carry my anger. That is not dramatic work. It is still the work that matters. He asked about his parents in pieces, never all at once. At breakfast, in the car, while looking out the window, did Dad really die? Not anymore. Why did Mom say he did? I'm still figuring that out. Did they not want me? That question sat between us like broken glass. I told him what they did was wrong. Then I stopped there. Children hear what you don't say as much as what you do. I was careful. Cold, maybe, but careful. I did not tell him about the money first, or the insurance, or Costa Rica. Those are adult motives. A child experiences outcomes. So I focused on outcomes. You are here now. You are safe here. You are not being left. Sometimes he nodded. Sometimes he changed the subject. Sometimes he stared at his cereal until it went soft. No one spoke during those moments. I let the silence stand. At times I wondered whether I should have confronted Kevin face to face before the arrest. Asked him one direct question and looked at whatever passed for a conscience in him. Maybe some viewers would say I owed that to blood. I don't think so. Blood had already had its chance. 3 years of it. By the time the airport came, the only useful confrontation was one that prevented escape. Anything else would have been ego. That doesn't mean I had no urge. One afternoon, after Tyler had fallen asleep on the couch, I sat alone and imagined the conversation. Why? Kevin shrugs. Debt. Fear. Things got out of hand. Why keep taking my money? Because I kept sending it. Why leave your son? He doesn't answer that one. In my mind, he never answers it. Maybe because no answer exists that doesn't reveal exactly what he became. The federal case moved forward without my need to decorate it. Evidence handled that. Paper handled that. The airport handled that. By then, some people had heard enough to form opinions. A few said I had done the right thing. A few said prison was still my own son's life ruined by my hand. A few said family matters should stay inside family. That last line always interests me. Inside family where? Inside the fake grave? Inside the monthly transfer? Inside the child parked in Knoxville? People love privacy most when truth embarrasses them. I never argued much. I simply said the same thing. There was a child involved. That usually ended it, and yet even I had moments of doubt. Late at night mostly, I would hear the house settling. Old wood, pipes, a train somewhere far off. Then I would think about Kevin as a boy. Greasy knees, baseball glove, wanting me to watch him throw in the yard. That memory still had force, enough to sting. I did not erase it to make the rest easier. I just stopped letting it make decisions. That is what boundaries are in real life. Not speeches, not dramatic cutoffs, just memory denied authority. Tyler started asking smaller questions after a while. Could he keep the nightlight on? Yes. Could he call me from school if needed? Yes. Could he plant tomatoes in the spring like his grandma used to? Yes. Those questions told me where healing begins, not in understanding all of it. In testing whether the world will hold, I passed those tests by staying. One evening he found an old photo album in the living room cabinet. My wife had kept everything. Birthday pictures, school pictures, camping trips. Kevin at ages that no longer matched the man he had become. Tyler sat beside me and turned pages slowly. There he is, he said once, pointing. I said, yes. He waited, maybe expecting more. I did not give him a speech about people changing. He was already living the result of that. Instead I said, your dad was young there. Tyler nodded and kept turning pages. That was enough. Meanwhile, the case reached its outcomes. Kevin received 9 years in prison. Carol received 6. The others who helped the scheme were caught in the fall too. Again, facts. Important facts, but still not the center. The center was this. The only innocent child in the story was no longer left behind. I began taking Tyler with me on errands. Hardware store, grocery runs, small routines. At the hardware store, he liked the aisle with switches and outlets. He asked what things did. I showed him the difference between a breaker and a fuse from memory, using boxes on the shelf. He listened hard. Professional habit again. Plain explanation. No drama. Current goes here. Protection goes here. Too much load and something fails. Halfway through, I realized I was not just teaching him a store aisle. I was teaching him that systems make sense when they're built honestly. Maybe that helped him. Maybe it helped me. As winter turned, the house changed with us. His shoes by the door. His school papers on the counter. Noise where there had been too much quiet. One night after dinner, he asked whether his parents would come get him. I set down my fork and said no. He looked at me. I added, you're with me now. He didn't cry. He didn't smile. He just kept eating. That little stillness told me he had needed certainty more than comfort. The confrontation everyone imagines in stories had already happened at the airport under bright lights. This part was quieter. But quiet does not mean weak. Quiet is where the real line gets drawn. Looking back, the final twist was never that Kevin was alive. That was the shock, not the deepest truth. The deepest truth was motive. At first I thought the fake death had to be about fear. A man crushed by debt does desperate things. That part was almost understandable in a narrow, ugly way. Then the layers kept coming off. The insurance money, the widow benefits, my monthly payments, the savings for Costa Rica. The child left behind. One motive became 3, then 5. By the end, the motive was not escape from debt. It was permission to take from anybody useful. That changes how you read a person. There are men who make one terrible choice and drown in it. Then there are men who discover fraud works and widen the opening. Kevin did the second. Carol did too. I know some people will still ask whether she was driven by him. Maybe. In parts. For a while. But nobody forced her to call me month after month and shape her voice around Tyler's needs. Nobody forced her to use widowhood like a working tool. Nobody forced her to let that boy stay with her sister while she built an exit route. At some point, participation becomes authorship. That is as far as I need to go with blame. The final records only confirmed what behavior had already shown. Cash ready. Passports ready. Departure date set. A woman traveling with Kevin. Costa Rica waiting like a reward. And Tyler absent from the plan. I keep returning to that. Because money can corrupt plenty of people. Pride can too. So can panic. But when a parent removes a child from the future they are building for themselves, that tells you the future was never meant to include responsibility at all. It was just meant to include them. After sentencing, a few people asked whether I felt vindicated. No, vindication is for arguments. This was rot. I felt accurate maybe, clear, less confused. That is closer to the truth. Kevin got 9 years. Carol got 6. Others tied to the scheme were dragged down with them. I did not celebrate. I also did not soften. A boundary is not hatred. It is simply the end of access. That took me years to learn. I had confused love with open doors, support with surrender, family with obligation. The story cured me of that. Not in a noble way. Just finally. There were still moments when the old wiring in me tried to spark back on. A birthday, a photo, a memory of Kevin helping me carry tools when he was young. I would feel the pull, then remember the airport, then the funeral, then Tyler saying, "Are you leaving too?" Each return changed the meaning of the last one. The funeral used to mean loss. Then it meant fraud. The money used to mean help. Then it meant exploitation. Tyler's phone calls used to mean connection. Then they meant cover. That is how betrayal works when you uncover it slowly. The past doesn't vanish. It gets relabeled. That includes me. I won't spare myself there. I ignored unease because suspicion felt disloyal. I let its family override plain signs. I kept wiring money into a story that never held steady under inspection. Could I have seen it earlier? Maybe. Would that have saved Tyler sooner? Maybe. That thought has teeth, and I let it bite when it comes. But guilt can become another form of self-importance if you let it. I was deceived. Then I stopped being deceived. That is the cleaner truth. Tyler settled more over time. He learned where the cereal bowls were, learned which floorboard creaked near the stairs, learned that when I said I'd be back from the store, I came back. Those things sound small. They are not small to a child. By spring, he asked if we could fix the old swing instead of replacing it. I checked the chain and the frame. Surface rust. Nothing worse. A little work, still sound. Electricians learn to trust inspection over appearance. Bad things can look fine. Old things can hold if they are honest. I tightened what needed tightening and left the rest. Tyler watched me work. "Is it safe now?" he asked. I tugged the chain once more and said, "Yes." That answer felt larger than the swing. At that point, the story had already ended where it mattered. The courts had done what courts do. The lies had failed in public. The child had a home. All that remained was to keep the line from reopening. Kevin was no longer my son in any practical sense. He was the man who had chosen debt, fraud, abandonment, and a fake grave over truth. I did not need to repeat that aloud every day. I just needed to live accordingly. That was the last twist, really. Not that justice happened, that I stopped waiting for family to become family again. The house in Pittsburgh feels different now. Not lighter exactly, just occupied in the right places. There are still my wife's traces here. A recipe card in a drawer. A scarf on the hook in the hall closet. A way the kitchen catches late afternoon light that still makes me think of her. Now there is Tyler too. Backpack by the chair. Pencil marks on scrap paper. A glass left near the sink no matter how many times I say use a coaster. At the start of all this, I thought I was holding on to my last piece of family by sending money south. I was wrong. I was funding a lie because I did not want to admit what my son had become. That is over. Kevin is where his choices put him. Carol is where hers put her. The people who helped them got pulled down with the rest. I don't revisit that more than necessary. The important thing begins here. Tyler wakes up in the same room every morning. He knows which cabinet holds the cereal. He knows the swing in the yard won't drop him. He knows I answer when he calls from another room. That is enough to build on. Sometimes he asks about Nashville. Less often now. Sometimes he asks about his parents. I answer what I can without turning him into a storage place for adult wreckage. Mostly we live. School, dinner, weather, hardware store runs. Quiet evenings. People still say things. They always will. Some say blood is blood. Some say a father should forgive anything. Some say prison was too much. Some say I should have stepped back and let life handle itself. Maybe they can think that. They didn't stand at a grave that never held a body. They didn't spend 3 years buying groceries cheap to fund a child's neglect. They didn't hear a little boy ask whether they were leaving too. I don't argue with them. I don't need the room to agree with me anymore. That might be the only real peace I got out of this. Not victory. Not closure. Clarity. Family is not the word people use while taking from you. Family is not the excuse after. Family is not whatever remains convenient once the money clears. I learned that late. I still learned it. Every now and then I think about the moment outside that liquor store in Nashville. My son walking into daylight after 3 years of death. For a long time, that was the image that defined everything. Now it isn't. Now, when I think about what lasted, I think of a smaller picture. Backyard, cool air, the old swing moving. I had repaired the chain but left the weathered seat. Tyler said he liked that it looked old. Said old things felt more true. Maybe he was right. One evening he was out there in a jacket too thin for the season, pushing off the ground with one sneaker and not saying much. I stood on the porch and watched him swing. No one else was there. No sirens. No phones. No lies to sort through. Just the creak of chain. The yard. The house behind us. After a while he looked over and asked, "You coming inside soon?" I said, "Yeah." He nodded once and kept swinging. That was enough. I went back in and left the porch light on.